I spent the last month and a half in the Middle East, a region I thought I would never set foot in again. I was asked to go by the Common Language Project to write a video blog about my experiences as a Marine fighting in Iraq. I accepted, wanted to share my perspective as a Marine who apprehensively volunteered to go to Iraq. I was also promised a chance to meet with refugees that fled from the conflict. I was curious to hear their story because it was one that I felt was similar to my own. We all left Iraq, and I think we were all haunted by what we left behind. The only difference between us is that I got to leave because my deployment was up, but they left because to stay would have meant death. Meeting with refugees made me realize two things. One, I had no idea who these people were the first time I deployed to Iraq. And the second was that all Iraqis who fled are still dealing with the ramifications of the war. Traveling with Marines as I did created an impersonal relationship between the locals and myself. It made stereotypes and misconceptions easy. Understanding comes with dialogue, and I can honestly say I cannot remember one word spoken to an Iraqi during my deployment. Sure, I was around them. I used to drive truckloads of them to prison, and I was always traveling through cities like Ramadi, Baghdad, and Fallujah. Reflecting on our endeavor 4 years later, I'm still amazed with how little understanding I gained of who the Iraqis were, and I had 7 or so months out there with them. What I learned instead is how an occupying force comes to regard the people that we were tasked to protect. I remember feeling suspicious, vengeful, and fearful of them. It was a far cry from the motives I came into the Marines with when I joined. I enlisted to stop a bad situation from becoming worse in Iraq, but by the time I got there, I was so fed up with hearing about U.S. servicemen being killed that I had little sympathy for the Iraqis. Going to college didn't help change my perception. I've read all the articles and books international affairs classes assign me, and it's the same effect as being deployed, distant. You actually have to hear these stories in the squalor and despair they are told in. You have to see the 50 families living in the 30 rooms, or the man recounting the death of his 2 brothers, considering himself lucky to be alive, to understand what it's like to be an Iraqi refugee. While being there, I was never uncomfortable with my role in the conflict. I joined to take responsibility as an American trying to stop the escalating sectarian violence. It sounds like a strange concept to many to shoulder a weapon to stop violence, but it's all I could think to do of at the time. On my second trip to Iraq, I often found myself being overly defensive about my role. I think this was because I wanted to be seen as an individual rather than blending into an ideal like every other camouflage member of the armed services. Some Iraqis got it and some didn't. During a meeting with a former Ba'athist colonel, I got a good tongue lashing about the evilness of the invasion and the subsequent occupation. After he was done and the 5-minute awkward silence subsided, we left to go back to our hotel room. He put his arm around me in friendship and told me where to get the best kebabs in Damascus. Confused at the sudden change of mood, I realized that I had made a mistake in assuming we were forever adversaries by our shared history. Instead, what we were was smaller parts in the larger arena of geopolitics. We share a human identity, and when he put his arm around me in friendship, I finally understood that we cannot define a region on wartime experiences alone.